and this was like back in the 90s, and they all had those like super thick glasses. Do you know what I'm talking about? And like 5 of them got into Harvard, and all of them are just like giga nerds, just like super nerdy, and they're all like psychologists and like mathematicians and like super like respected.
that is where the three of you are going to draw, and there's an L and a C and an R, and that is where you will start. And I didn't bring, so I'm using Julian's sticker, so I guess that's pretty neutral. It's Julian's sticker. All right, so you can pick one, if you want, and that's center, and your left.
One left is Bob.
So we'll do it. So Jay, Bob, and Setti. Yeah. Oh, you're in the middle anyway. Excellent. Well, thank you. And how do you guys want to be referred to? By the way, when you're referred to by last name? Would you? Well, I can imagine that the students may feel a little more comfortable using just more. No, you don't. Well, I'll let the moderator decide. She's the one who's running the show. I think at a stupid run, I imagine it may be it. It's up to the moderator. She's the one in charge. So if you guys are ready to take your places, we'll get the students in their places, and we'll get started. Our glitch is ironed out. So she's going to explain it. It's going to go left. The intros will be left, center, right. And the first question will be center, right, left. The next question will be right, left, center. And then it's just going to keep rotating.
I lost it after the first.
She'll tell you who to speak. I think you'll get this. Excellent. Thank you so much. One little thing about do the same order for question to follow. Don't rotate the order until the next question. All right, you're good. Get up there. Let's get on our play. Yeah, you guys. Busy on stage. That is just fine. You guys can.
We thank the candidates here for taking the time to meet with us today. The format of the debate will start with opening statements from each candidate which will each last 120 seconds. Then our panel of students will ask questions which the candidates will answer in alternating order. Responses will be limited to 90 seconds. 60-second follow-up responses may be allowed for the moderator. We will keep these statements limited to 120 seconds. Our timer and they will put one hand up for 15 seconds left and a second hand up after 10 minutes. The questions were developed and prioritized by Monomoy Regional High School Democrats. By lot, Mr. Warren has been selected to give the first opening statement.
Been fighting for years and decades for. We fight for an assault weapons ban in this country. We need to ensure, and I was a member of Mayors Against Illegal Guns when I became mayor of Newton 9 years ago. We need to make sure we have universal background checks that are real. We need to ensure that we close the gun show loophole for real. We've got to back Maura Healey's attempts. Yes, the Supreme Judicial Court said it was legal for her to close the gun manufacturing loophole for assault weapons, but she also is being challenged with her administrative order to ban bump stocks here in the state of Massachusetts. We've got to stand with her. We also need to fight for and support the extreme risk legislation that's on Beacon Hill right now that would give the power of judges to take away weapons from people that would harm themselves or other people. And we need a governor that's willing to work with other states to track weapons when they're coming into our state, trace them, and ensure we have, beyond Massachusetts, laws that protect all of us in the New England region and the rest. The National Governors Association should be leading on this. If I'm your governor, I would be leading on this. Thank you.
I will allow 60-second follow-up responses on this issue, the first being from Mr. Massie.
I know there's a good deal to say, and I assume my colleagues would like to add something. I'd like to add that I'm very proud of my niece, Violet Massie Veriker, because on the Wednesday that Parkland happened, she was horrified. She's a junior, and she went out the next day. They did their walkout, and as she was going out, she told her mother that she had thought of a hashtag, which was me next with a question mark. She put that out. She lives in Pelham, New York, a long way from Florida. She came back on Friday, and she said she was upset because she had completely blown a math test. And my sister said, "That's okay, honey, because your hashtag has been shared more than 10,000 times in the last 24 hours. And I want to tell you that because we need to have the political will that needs to be driven. It's all of these issues and the political will to reverse the power of the NRA, to end the influence of big corporations on politics. And I think that's a key step. It's the politics and the regulations that we need to fight.
A lot of people say, oh, thank God Charlie Baker isn't a crazy Republican. Aren't we lucky? Right? On this issue and many others, we need to educate people. Charlie Baker originally was not supportive of the federal assault weapons ban until he became supportive of it. He refused to support Maura Healey in her enforcement of our ban on assault weapons here. He does not support this extreme risk protective order legislation that we were just talking about that would make our community safer. And to the point about politics and money, it was reported that the CEO of the company that makes gun silencers, which are now banned in Massachusetts, but there is legislation to lift the ban, gave a bunch of money to the Republican Governors Association and had a meeting with Charlie Baker where he claims Charlie Baker committed to him if that legislation, which would weaken our gun laws here in Massachusetts, hit his desk, he would sign it. There's a clear choice in this election, and we need to make sure people are aware of the choice.
Our next response will be from Mr. Warren.
These elections are about choices. Charlie Baker appointed the head of the NRA for Massachusetts as the head of gaming and wildlife here in Massachusetts. Charlie Baker says things that people want to hear, but he does the opposite. At the end of the day, folks, we need chief executive leadership that's not just going to talk the talk, but that's going to walk the walk. One of the things I was proud of doing as a mayor was organizing mayors around the state to support Maura Healey's attempt to close, the administrative attempt to close the assault weapons manufacturing loophole. If I'm the governor, I'm going to be on the ground in cities and towns across this state, working with police chiefs, town administrators, members of select boards, and organizing them around ensuring that we get this extreme risk legislation passed. That's the kind of executive leadership we need now on this issue.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Isabel O'Donnell.
What programs would you put forward that will combat climate change? What should the state do to promote clean energy? What should be done about the Pilgrim nuclear power plant?
The first response will be given by Mr. Gonzales.
So climate change is the biggest threat to our planet, and we need leadership on this issue, which we don't have right now. As your governor, I would accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources. I would oppose the expansion of any natural gas pipeline infrastructure in this state, which just furthers our dependence on fossil fuels. I think we should be the first state in the nation to adopt carbon pricing, which all the economists agree is a really important tool and incentive to driving us to a true clean energy economy as quickly as we can. So these are some of the steps I would take. First and foremost, I would do everything I could to get us to a true clean energy economy as quickly as we can. On Pilgrim nuclear power plant, this is a public safety issue. This is a public safety issue. We've got to close the plant as safely as possible, as quickly as we can. And right now, this is another example of an area where Governor Baker somehow seems to think he has nothing to do with this. And this is a federally regulated issue. And on like so many other issues, there's no leadership and no presence and no advocating for the interests and values of the people of this state. And if I'm your governor, you can count on the fact that on Pilgrim nuclear power plant and any other issue that affects people's safety and people's lives and our values here in this state, I will stand up and I will advocate for you. Thank you.
The next response will be given by Mr. Warren.
We need to close Pilgrim now, right now. I want to thank the Cape Downwinders for all their effort and support. There are years of people that have been fighting to make sure that we close this plant down. We know it's causing harm currently, and it will continue to cause harm. Moving on to the climate change challenge, I think about climate change the same way I think about economic inequality. When I was in Newton as mayor, we actually cut our carbon footprint in half as a municipality. I was very proud of that in the 8 years since I was mayor. We also shared, and we did it through ramping up solar power and reducing energy consumption. We shared that solar power off municipal property with 900 of our low-income residents, give them an energy credit on their bill. This is the type of thinking we need to do here in the state of Massachusetts. We need to ramp up solar, we need to ramp up offshore wind, invest in renewable energy technologies. We should put in place a carbon tax where we can reinvest that so we can invest in infrastructure for people to lower their energy bills. This not only is good for the environment and gets us to the 2050 green target, but it also creates green jobs. So this governor has continued to slow down solar, continued to slow down offshore wind, has made no attempt to make investments in growing renewable energy. If we do that now, we can address economic inequality and be a world leader with Trump pulling us out of the Paris Accords around climate change.
Our last response will be given from Mr. Massie.
Jay said that we need leadership on this question. And I mentioned that I organized this event 26 years ago, but I didn't just stop there. I ran a national organization called Ceres that fought climate change, brought investors together with activists, and we sat down with businesses. And let me tell you something, I'm a social activist who went to Harvard Business School in order to understand how to push back against corporate power. And we have damaged by corporate power in this, as Exxon and other companies have lied to their shareholders and lied to us. And I put together the Investor Network on Climate Risk. $24 trillion of investors who realize that fossil fuel is broken, dangerous, and we need to abandon it. We spend $18 billion a year buying fossil fuel when we could have offshore wind that could generate at full build-out $6 billion in taxes. This governor has been slowing down solar, slowing down wind, pushing pipelines. His Department of Public Utilities is full of fossil fuel cronies. They'd all be looking for other positions if I become governor. On Pilgrim, I just want to say it's shocking to me that can have 4 emergency shutdowns in 3 months, and it's closed now. I understand it should stay closed. And this is an example of a decision that was made to pursue a technology that was dangerous and dirty, and we need to move into the 21st century, create tens of thousands of new jobs. It is the greatest opportunity in the history of Massachusetts. Charlie Baker should be pursuing that to protect the planet, to create jobs. I don't understand why he's not, but I promise you I would drive this quickly and broadly and deeply to save our planet and protect our jobs.
The next question will be asked by Ted Clifford.
Increasing state funds towards education, how would you propose that be accomplished?
The first response will be given by Mr. Warren.
One of the drivers of economic inequality is the unequal system we have in public education here in the state of Massachusetts. As we speak, there are districts that are laying off educators, and they have been for years because K through 12 is underfunded. As I've said, we've got to fully fund K through 12 to reflect the needs of children coming in our classroom. We need to add after-school enrichment and summer enrichment and early childhood to public education, and I believe in lifelong free public college with apprenticeships included. I also believe we need to pass the millionaire's tax, which will be on the ballot. I'm hopeful that it will get out of the SJC, asking people making $1 million a year or more to contribute more in revenue so that we can invest in education and transportation. I also believe, in regard to revenue, that Donald Trump just gave one of the largest tax cuts in American history to multinational corporations and people with extreme wealth. We have got to ask those folks and those entities to contribute more beyond the millionaire's tax to invest in education systems that work and prepare our workforce and our children to make ends meet in the 21st century economy. It is unequal, it is unfair, it is unjust what is happening to public education in this state, and we've got to ask those who are doing really well to contribute more to ensure our people have a shot.
The next response will be given by Mr. Massie.
We have a lot of deep structural problems in this state. Let me tell you how we need to think about them. We start today by saying it's going to cost money, it's too much, we can't do it. And I understand that people feel burdened. People don't make that much money, they don't want to pay taxes, they believe those taxes won't achieve the goal or they'll be stolen and rerouted, so they don't want to do it. But if you make the case, you need to set out, first of all, what do we really want? What is the goal we'd love to see? Secondly, what benefits would it bring? Thirdly, what would it cost if we don't do it? And I strongly agree that we need to fight inequality, wage inequality, wealth inequality, and we need to prepare our kids for the future. So what would it cost if we don't do that, if we look into the future? And then finally, what would be the price and how would we pay for it? So there is real money that we need to consider for transportation, for education, but we don't just start with a price tag. We talk about the benefits, the things that would do for our young people in the case of education, the things it would do for our economy if we built out a modern transportation system, the things it would do for all of us to lower our energy bills if we worked on climate change. So we need to have a much bigger, bolder idea of what Massachusetts can be, and that is our heritage. That's what the founders of Massachusetts and the people who first came out and the people who built our economy, they believed in big things. And that's what we need to do again. This governor has no vision and no desire to move us to a long-term better place.
The last response will be given by Mr. Gonzales.
Thank you. So the most important thing, in my view, that we do together, the most important responsibility we have together through our collective instrument, government, is to ensure that every single child has access to a great public education. Right now, we are not living up to that responsibility. It is very clear, based on various studies that have been done, that the state is not living up to its responsibility to provide adequate funding to public school districts around this state, particularly districts in lower income communities, in urban centers, in rural districts, communities that have a high prevalence of English language learners and children with special needs. So we need to invest more in our public education system. I, like Setti and Bob, believe the best near-term way to raise meaningful new revenue that we desperately need in a fair, progressive. Every single child and family in this state has access to high-quality childcare and preschool as well. The evidence is clear on this. Kids, particularly lower-income kids that have access to high-quality childcare and preschool, it is game-changing for them in terms of their success in school and in life. And this is where we could get the biggest return on investment for kids and families.
Our next question will be asked by Lily Ryan.
What can the state do to help communities like ours develop more affordable housing?
The first response will be given by Mr. Massie.
For many parts of the state, one of the first things we need to do is we need to provide alternative models. We need to build more housing. We need to encourage land trusts, which own the land, but the buildings on top of them are owned by people. We need to encourage co-housing. There are many models of ownership that would allow us to bring down the price. There are also methods of allowing accessory dwellings so that we can have people live on the same property. It's also very important to understand that everything is linked. So, for example, in most parts of the state, and I believe here, if you had better transportation, people could move up and down and live in different places. So if we had faster trains, if we had faster public transportation, we had better bus lines, we could live in different places and be able to benefit for the lower housing. So I believe that this is another issue where the market has been asked to solve a problem that it can't solve. Because when you leave it to the market builds rich housing for rich people. And that's okay, except we all need housing. It should really be considered a right. And as I look around the state, as I've been to so many places, people are just getting hammered as prices go up, as rent goes up, and they can't do it. So one of the things, again, I want to reinforce, we need a governor who looks into the future and addresses the problems, lays out a pattern, how do we get from the mess today to where we want to be in the future. And I just want to reassure you, there are wonderful models, wonderful ideas all around the country and all around the world that we need to adopt right here in Massachusetts.
Our next response will be given by Mr. Gonzales.
First and foremost, we need to exercise basic leadership skills on this issue, like many others. What is the scope of the problem? What do we need to do to solve it? What does our goal need to be? What are the different tools we have in place to help us achieve that goal? Develop the plan and execute against the plan. None of that is happening right now under this current governor. And it would happen under me. The affordable housing crisis is a crisis in this state, all across this state. It looks different in different pockets of the state. And I know it's acute here on the Cape, workforce housing in particular. And it looks different here than it does in the greater Boston area. So we need to develop that plan and execute against the plan, different plans for different regions of the state that are going to address the needs here. It necessarily will need to include some regulatory reform, I believe, to ensure that communities are allowing the production of the additional affordable housing that's needed. I agree with Bob that transportation is a tool in our toolbox that needs to be part of the solution. Think about the fact if instead of just the Cape Flyer, we actually had high-speed rail from Boston to the Cape, where it would not only be an economic development boon for the Cape, but it would also be a potential affordable housing solution for both sides of that train, right? So we got to think creatively about it. We need basic leadership skills exercise here, and we need to treat this issue with the sense of urgency that it demands, because this is a crisis. It is one of the things, along with transportation, that is starting to pull Massachusetts backwards, and we need to take them seriously.
Our final response will be given by Mr. Warren.
Special permits and zoning, and the process was driven by developers, which produce higher-end housing. We had to put together a plan, which I did for the first time in Newton's history, that identified places where we could build, some zoning changes to allow for additional building for affordability in my home community. When I think about this challenge at the state level and here on the Cape, I think about it the same way. Three things I think that are going to be incredibly important to create affordability here and elsewhere in the state of Massachusetts. One, we've got to change the zoning rules so it's easier to build multifamily housing. So we've got to ask towns to identify areas where we can build multifamily housing and mixed use. We've got to actually make it legal for cities and towns that want to require developers to build a certain percentage of affordability into their zoning to do it. So we've got to make those zoning changes. I support legislation on Beacon Hill to do that. Second, we've got to make sure we're subsidizing building affordable units. For decades, the federal government has cut programs like community development block grants and home to allow for the building and subsidizing of affordability. The state needs to put that investment in. And lastly, it's got to be connected with transportation and higher paying jobs where people live. Yes, we need high-speed rail connected, but we also need, here in the Cape, but we also need to make sure we're building out regional transit authorities, expanding them and supporting them so that they are connected to housing, people get to where they need to go.
Our next question will be asked by James Kiernan.
We as students are considering college choices in the near future, and costs are a major issue for us. What can Massachusetts do to make college more affordable?
The first response will be given by Mr. Gonzales.
So this is a huge issue, right? And there are many in your position who end up, who want to go to college but can't because they can't afford it, or who end up going and incurring huge student debt that burdens them for years afterwards. What can the state do? First, I think we need to make our public colleges and universities in this state affordable for every single resident who wants to go. And by affordable, I mean debt-free. We need to make it possible for our kids to be able to go and get that degree that they want, which is in their interests and is going to position them for success in their own lives. But it's also in our collective interest, right? I mean, most of the children who end up going to or young people who end up going to our public colleges and universities end up graduating and staying right here in Massachusetts and feeding the demand that our businesses have for a train going to college, wherever they end up going to college, to try to be creative in helping to reduce the burden of young people who have existing student loans that are burdening them. So that's something that I would look at as well. But I think this needs to be a priority of the state, and as your governor, I would make sure that we deal with it.
Our next response will be given by Mr. Warren.
So this is one of these questions where we have to be completely honest about what's really happening. 50 years ago, you could work your way through college. You could pay your way through school, pay a little tuition, housing, transportation, food. This is virtually impossible today. We know that. 23% of people that start higher education do not finish. That number's going up, and it's because of cost. 100 years ago in Massachusetts, we required people to read and write. Decades later, said we need a high school degree. We've always been a leader in public education. We have to provide free public college, lifelong, with apprenticeships and internships included. Because we know right now, and I meet with students all around the state, some of them are living out of their cars, folks, because they can't afford housing or food or transportation. Now, I appreciate the efforts of the governors of some bordering states, Governor Cuomo, Gina Raimondo, and putting together debt-free applications for people. This is a difference that we have up here. We have to provide free public college just like high school if we're really going to ensure that people are going to get the credential or degree they need to make ends meet in this economy. And we've got to ask people who are doing really well to contribute more to make that investment so we can make it happen for people here in the state.
Given by Mr. Massie.
So this format doesn't always allow us to discuss a question because you want to hear what we would do. And that's, of course, that's fine. But I'd like to build on what Setti said and unpack a little bit what he said. So the difference between us, I think we all aspire to free college because that's what the nation built with our land trust colleges, land grant colleges, and we were committed. We understood that people's economy, people's prosperity, our prosperity, depended on that. The question is, can you go straight to free college, or can you go first to debt-free, meaning that we would provide free college for people of low income, or do we need to start by going with people who giving low-income people free college, but asking those who have more, and in some cases a lot, to contribute? So I aspire to the direction that Setti is proposing, but I believe the first step in order to manage the cost of that transition would be to go to debt-free. Now, I used to run a program and teach at UMass Boston, and I have seen how incredibly important our public system is. I've seen how hard people work. They hold down 2 jobs. They take more than 4 years to get through. And they come from an incredible variety of backgrounds, traditions, ethnicities. So I'm running out of time to discuss it, but I would move forward to debt-free. I believe that we have to do this. We used to be able to.
Our next question will be asked by Isabel O'Donnell.
Here at Monomoy, we have multiple student-led organizations that actively work against human rights issues around the world. What actions would you take to make Massachusetts a safe and welcoming environment for refugees from places like Syria? What should the state do about immigration laws?
Given by Mr. Warren.
Well, the first thing we've got to do is have a governor that does not equivocate when it comes to welcoming Syrian refugees to Massachusetts, like Governor Baker did just over a year or 2 years ago. The second thing we've got to do is ensure we put in place the Safe Communities Act on Beacon Hill. These elections are about choices, folks. The City of Newton put in place a Welcoming Cities Act. My city council, my city Democratic committee came to me after the election of President Trump, and they said, we've got to put protections in place for undocumented people in our city so our police are not federalized. We got that done. I work with the police chief and other community members to put that in place. We had 19 votes on their city council to get that passed. Right now, I would be working on the ground with mayors, town administrators, select persons all across the state, convening them, engaging them around the importance of putting in place the Safe Communities Act on Beacon Hill. This will make us more safe, not less safe. It is also a statement about who we are, our values as a Commonwealth. So I believe we've got to get this done. That's the kind of chief executive I would be.
Our next response will be given by Mr. Massie.
How many of you here come from parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who came from another country? We were a welcoming community, or a more or less welcoming community that brought your ancestors here. And we need to continue to do that. And I know this is a debate going on up and down the Cape, but I agree we must pass the Safe Communities Act. And if we can't get that done, we must encourage town by town, state by state, until there is the political will. Now, the reason I brought my notebook up here, because this morning I met a woman named Constantina to Boston College, and she's living what we think of as the American dream. And that is the American dream, that we are welcoming, that we bring the talents in, from around the world. Now, this president is absolutely going against every value that we have had as a nation for more than 250 years. Now, we've had times when we've wanted to fight immigrants, but we understand their values. So, number one, you have to have a governor who articulates those principles exercises the leadership, says what our values are, and then fights for that. And in this case, it's fighting the president in addition to fighting and running against a governor who has coddled this president. This is a matter of fundamental value of our fundamental values.
The final response will be given by Mr. Gonzales.
The very first piece of legislation I supported as a candidate for governor was the Safe Communities Act, because I believe state and local law enforcement officials should be focused on enforcing state and local laws and not doing the work of federal immigration officials, which is not their job. Particularly now when the president is asking those federal immigration officials to do things that, in my view, are inconsistent with our values. Now, I want to share a story about a woman in Springfield, Massachusetts, named Gisela, who is a Peruvian immigrant, immigrated here 17 years ago, married an American citizen, has 2 children who are American citizens, played by the rules, got a work permit, pays her taxes. 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump decided to deport her. And instead of going to the airport on the day she was supposed to take her plane to Peru, she went and took sanctuary in a church in Springfield, which I went to visit 2 weeks ago. And I went to visit that church because I wanted to show support for them and stand with Gisela when the mayor of Springfield decided to threaten the church, got a search warrant to send his housing inspectors in with the hope of showing that it wasn't meeting housing codes, ordered his lawyers to strip them of their 501c3 status. It's outrageous. It is outrageous. And it is one thing to be a governor who's going to support laws that protect people here and make people here feel included. It's another thing to be a leader who speaks from the heart, who sees people as human beings, and is going to send the signal that he and their government is there for everybody. And that's the type of governor I'll be.
Our next question will be asked by Ted Clifford.
Insurance rates have been growing much faster than inflation in recent years. What ideas do you have to control and/or bring down healthcare costs?
The first response will be given by Mr. Massie.
I was born with a serious illness known as hemophilia, which causes bleeding in your joints. And by the time I was 4, I couldn't walk anymore. And I didn't gain that ability to walk again until my family moved, actually for other reasons, to Europe, to France. And we discovered that I, as a foreign resident, would be covered under their single payer. And that's why I got the medication that was necessary to put me back on my feet. So I have been for single payer for 40 years. Not only because it is just, because we need health care as a right, but also because everything else is a mess. We are spending way too much money. We are allowing pharmaceuticals, and again, this is part of my battle against corporate power. We're allowing pharmaceuticals to drive up their prices. We don't have adequate negotiation strength with them. We are allowing too many hospitals to concentrate and become bigger and drive up costs. And we are allowing ourselves to think that's the best we can do when every other industrial country in the world has a national health insurance or single payer system. So I know we all favor this, and you probably hear that we all favor a lot of things together. But there are some people who have deep experience pushing through change at a national level, at an international level, bringing companies together, bringing people together, activists together. I have had that experience. This is going to take a huge ability to resist the forces that want to stop this. I have the ability to overcome those forces.
Human right. And that everybody deserves access to the health care services they need to be as healthy as they can be, then the system we have today is not your system. Because our system doesn't provide for that equal access. And, as everybody in this room knows, it is way too complicated to navigate. It is way too expensive. It is not financially sustainable. And the quality of care is not nearly as good as it should be. I really believe moving to a single-payer healthcare system is the best way to get to not only a financially sustainable system, we will cut out a lot of the costs and actually be able to invest in some of the services like mental health treatment and addiction treatment that we are not properly investing in today. But it will be easier for people to navigate, and it will result in better quality care. Now, we all support this. Bob just made the case for why he's the best one to take this on. But I'm going to disagree with Bob on this, not surprisingly. I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually worked in the healthcare industry. I was CEO of a health insurance company that covered low-income people in the Medicaid program here and in New Hampshire, and I believe we need to get rid of health insurance companies. I could go on and on about all the waste and inefficiency that is a result of our multi-payer system. I was chair of the board of the Health Connector for 3.5 years when I worked for Governor Patrick when we implemented successfully Massachusetts health reform here in Massachusetts. I know the industry. This is not simple. This is a big deal. And we need to do it thoughtfully to get to the outcomes we need. I think I'm best positioned, based on my experience, to deliver on a single-payer healthcare system that works better for people. Thank you.
The final response will be given by Mr. Warren.
I too believe in single payer. Surprise. Look, I saw as a mayor the rising costs of health care with my employees. I saw as a candidate recently listening to people making choices between paying for a copay and going to the doctor or putting food on the table. I've seen people making choices between paying for prescription drugs they need to stay alive for themselves or their family, or paying for the rent or mortgage. We know that we're the second highest, most expensive state in the
hospitals and saying, how can we get you to do this? I think this is going to take a movement. And I believe that movement is ready to go, and I believe that is something that, as I said, I know how to do, I intend to do, and that's what will work.
I also respect Bob. Setti. Two great guys, by the way, but I agree. And this grassroots movement on the single-payer issue, I think these guys would agree. I think it is the issue we probably get the most positive response to out on the campaign trail. And there is this energy behind this. I think there is a growing realization, including from constituencies who used to be like business leaders and doctors, who now are saying, we're so sick of dealing with the administrative nightmare of all these different health insurance companies and the uncertainty of cost, that we are open to single payer. But we are cautious about it because we need to do it thoughtfully. We could do single payer in a way that doesn't get the outcomes we need. It is a means. It's not an end in and of itself, which is why experience in the industry, and as the only candidate with leadership experience in state government, as Governor Patrick's Secretary of Administration and Finance, when I helped him get a lot of the big things done that we got done in the Patrick administration, I think I provide the leadership experience to actually get this done. And I'm asking for your support to do it.
The final response will be given by Mr. Warren.
I respect them too. Look, one other piece of this healthcare debate I do want to mention is Governor Baker's treatment of public employees. Just recently, Governor Baker, in the dark of the night, his GIC commission attempted to pull plans of state employees that they have depended on for years to get their health insurance. I was down there at the Boston Teachers Union hearing the stories of these state employees and other employees within the GIC that would have lost their plans, depended on it. Some of them with life-saving programs and innovations and therapies that they need. Now, as a mayor, I negotiated with my unions, 17 unions, twice. I protected their health insurance benefits, and I did not propose to move them into the GIC because I knew this day could come. We need to have a governor that treats their state employees, the public servants, the people that work for the public, with respect, invests in them, and has them at the table when making critical decisions around health insurance and benefits. That's the kind of governor I would be.
The next question will be asked by Lily Ryan.
It is clear that opioids are a growing issue, specifically here on Cape. What do you plan to do to address the opioid crisis? Furthermore, should the possession of opioids be treated as a public health issue or
The public health crisis of our time. It is ruining people's lives. It's tearing families apart. It is ravaging communities across this entire state. And we need to address it with the level of urgency that the crisis demands. So what would I do? You can go to my website, jfreme.com, and read the entire set of proposals that I just released a few days ago. But a couple of things that I think we desperately need to do. One is invest in our treatment system to ensure that the supply of treatment providers across the state is meeting the demand for treatment, which right now it is not. I also think we need to do some bold things. You mentioned whether we should be treating people who are addicted like criminals. Charlie Baker's doing that. He's putting people who didn't commit crimes, who are civilly committed, into Department of Corrections facilities and not providing them with the treatment they need. I would end that. Stop that and get them into the treatment they need to recover. I also think we need to be bold. I support safe injection sites. We're not going to be able to help people get the treatment and recovery they need if they don't stay alive. I also propose that we should provide health insurance coverage for medical marijuana as a treatment for people who are addicted or as an alternative to opioids for pain relief. We've got to think boldly about this. We need to do everything we can to take this crisis on.
The next response will be given by Mr. Warren.
Thank you for that question. This has been a centerpiece for my campaign. As a mayor, I heard from people that lost their family members from addiction, their friends from addiction. As a candidate, I've been all across this state, and I've heard the same. Since 2014, 7,000 people have died of opiate addiction in the state of Massachusetts. 250,000 people are living with addiction. That number's growing at 70 a day. Over 5 people a day are dying of opioid addiction in the state of Massachusetts. I decided to do a series of town halls to shine a light on this, to take the stigma away, and to make it sure we're not just looking at education and prevention, but we're looking at investing in treating people with opioid addiction in this state. I've done 9 town halls, including the first one I did here on the Cape several months ago. And here's what I'm hearing. We need more beds for detox. We need more clinicians. And we need community-based, lifelong treatment with wraparound services for people and their families. Violent drug offenders in August. And I made a decision last week after the criminal justice reform bill was passed by the Senate and the House that I would veto that legislation. And the reason why I believe that is because they added in that legislation, Charlie Baker's legislation, to put mandatory minimums in place for nonviolent drug offenders. It is wrong. We have got to say no. I appreciate the work that has been done on that bill. I really do. But at a certain point, we cannot continue to allow the jailing and incarceration of people that are living with addiction in this state. It is wrong.
I'm going to answer your last question first. I mean, if we treated this as a medical promise, we should obviously be moving people into medical facilities. We don't say when somebody says I have cancer, or even if I'm addicted to alcohol, we say, well, therefore you're going to prison to get treatment. There are 4 things I would do as governor. Number 1, I would support all the lawsuits around the country against the pharmaceutical companies that made billions in carfentanil from China and other places, which is a brutal, deadly, highly poisonous substance that is flooding into the United States. Number 3, I agree with everything that was proposed here about health services. And we have all known people whose children have died or who have died. I was with a woman named Joanne last night in Somerville, whose son died. Many of us know Kate Donahue, whose son died. How many more people do we need before we act as though this were an epidemic? And finally, there is a link to what is happening in the opioid epidemic and the despair that many young people and others feel that they do not have a future. They don't have an economy that will support them. They're never going to own a job. Own a home. They are not going to get a job that they can build a future on. So these things are interconnected. And that's the way I see the world. Things are interconnected, and we need to attack all four. As governor, I would do so.
I'm going to ask the candidates to please respect the time limit so we can get to as many issues as possible tonight. I'm also going to allow a 60-second follow-up from each of the candidates, starting with Mr. Gonzales.
Thank you. So this is another area where, as you're deciding among all of us, I think we bring different experience to this. And this is an area where I have experience. When I was the CEO of the health insurance company here in Massachusetts, Celticare Health, that covered low-income people in the Medicaid program, the number one health issue of our membership, of any health issue, was addiction. So we attacked it. We tried all kinds of new things. We eliminated all prior authorization requirements for people needing addiction treatment to make it as easy as possible for them to get the treatment they needed. We invested in social workers on the ground to find our members who we knew were addicted, who we couldn't reach by phone, to get them engaged in the treatment they needed. The Boston Globe named our company one of 46 game-changing companies in Massachusetts because of the innovative work we did on the opioid epidemic. So this is an issue I'm familiar with, and as governor, I would attack it with the same level of urgency and the same level of boldness as we did at our health insurance company.
The next response will be from Mr. Warren.
I just want to add two other pieces out of the criminal justice system. We need to be treating people that are incarcerated so they're ready for reentry. Mental health, substance abuse, we need to invest in those. And then when people reenter, we need to ensure that we have programming and investment in people so that they don't go back to jail. They're connected to transportation, social services, and housing. In this bill that what I just mentioned, there was no money made available for investment when people get out of being incarcerated. We know that these monies have been cut at the state level. So we've got to make sure we're investing in people so that there is not a revolving door and people get treatment into the criminal justice system.
I'd like to ask a question. Why has this not been addressed? Why has this not been solved? And I think there's an interesting answer here. It is because we have elites that are running Beacon Hill, that are in Boston. I think they either aren't aware of what's going on or they don't care. And that's a problem. We are coming apart as a Commonwealth. I think we all understood, certainly have. But most people don't know. They haven't looked into people's eyes. They don't know what's happening. So as governor, I want to bring the state together, and one way I would do that is to move the governor's office 2 days a month to a place that's been overlooked and forgotten. Not only to give a spotlight to what's going on there, but also to bring people from Boston to meet with me so they can get to know the state they actually live in.
Our next question will be asked by James Kiernan.
Despite the progress on marriage equality, there can still be a lot of prejudice directed towards people based on their sexual identity. What can be done to protect LGBTQ students? And as a follow-up, what is your stance on the bathroom issue?
The first response will be given by Mr. Warren.
This is an issue, a civil rights issue, a human rights issue that we need to continue to push back on. Look, as a mayor, we were among one of the first communities in the Commonwealth to put in place a public accommodations law for transgender people. I'm really proud of that. We were among the first cities in the Commonwealth where we had an appointed liaison who was LGBTQ, Holly Ryan, who worked with me within Newton Public Schools and in our businesses to ensure that the rights of LGBTQ people were protected. What would I do? First of all, we have two very unfortunate things coming up this fall on Beacon Hill and in our state, one of which is a question that would reverse the public accommodations law that was signed a year or two ago, behind closed doors by Charlie Baker, by the way. at the state level to have a liaison schools in our community, to the LGBTQ community in an office, just like we in the city of Newton, so that we can ensure that our young people are being protected, as well as people in public spaces as well as private spaces in the state of Massachusetts.
Our next response will be given by Mr. Massie.
Setti has identified the two dangers that we have to transgender rights, and I would fight those. I also want to say we need to exercise leadership here because people are frightened of transgender issues if they have never met someone, and they express moral reservations about it. But change is difficult. For those who are older, this has been a transition as we've come to understand the reality and the life experience of transgender people. I'll speak for myself. And I started my career as a minister, and I've always supported gay rights, but I had to learn about transgender rights and understand why it was so important. Sense of moral outrage, whatever it is that's blocking them. We have to, first of all, fight for rights. I would do that as governor. And second of all, bring about healing and learning in the state. And I think that's entirely possible, but not when you have a governor who is actually trying to appeal to conservatives outside of this state. Who knows what his future political plans are? But he is hedging every bet so that he can look good to conservatives around the country. You have to ask yourself why. But whatever the reason is, it is not because he wants to serve the people of Massachusetts.
The final response will be given by Mr. Gonzales.
So I also support the transgender rights legislation, oppose the repeal of it, and oppose the conversion therapy legislation that's pending on Beacon Hill. One of the big reasons I'm running is because I think it's really important that people have a governor that's not only going to fight for the right laws, but who is going to speak to our better selves, and who is going to stand up and be a voice for our values and for humanity and for the rights of every single human being. We have a governor right now who doesn't govern from here in that way. He doesn't see it as part of the job. He reluctantly, as Setti mentioned, reluctantly signed transgender rights legislation, took no position on it until it landed on his desk. No leadership on an issue of core civil rights. Reluctantly signed it. And as your governor, you can count on the fact that I will not only advocate for the laws we need to protect people, but I will speak for people.
We will have one last question before going to closing statements asked by Izzy O'Donnell.
Toward the goal of improving the economy in Massachusetts for everybody, what goals and strategies should the state government pursue?
The first response will be given by Mr. Massie.
I have built my campaign around the idea that our goal should be to pursue a just, sustainable economy that creates prosperity for everybody. Supporting the local economy, creating local capital, introducing new models of ownership. There are 200 groups. This governor's never heard of any of them. In fact, I've never heard him say the word sustainability. So we need to be able to move, I would move, the discussion into the 21st century where we would apply those models, where we would learn from other countries, where we would invest locally. The last thing we need to do is be giving huge tax cuts to enormous corporations that already have plenty of money, like GE and Amazon. I don't mind if they come under certain strict conditions, but the GE was given hundreds of millions of dollars at the very point that Pittsfield is still trying to get money out of them to clean up the Housatonic. That's wrong. We need to move into the 21st century.
The next response will be given by Mr. Gonzales.
So one of the biggest reasons I'm running for governor is because we've got this huge issue of economic inequality that is holding way too many people back. And my agenda is all about trying to make a difference on those issues. So I support a living wage, paid family leave, affordable housing, child care and preschool being affordable to every family that needs it. We are the most expensive state in the country for child care and preschool. There are too many parents who are having to leave their job because they can't afford child care, which is bad for the child. It's bad for that parent, who often is a woman, who is having to leave their job and postpone their career advancement, and it's bad for the family, and it's bad for our economy. So a lot of these issues we've been talking about today, and a lot of what my agenda is as a candidate for governor and would be as governor, is about taking on a lot of these challenges that are holding people back. And I want to just, since I was talking about women for a second, you can find on my website an entire economic opportunity agenda for women, which I think needs to be a special focus because of the inequities, the gender inequities, the wage gap, the leadership gap, you name it. And I've got a whole series of proposals to address it, which in part include state government leading by example in this area, which I think we need to do.
The final response will be given by Mr. Warren.
So I agree with many of the progressive policies that I know that the two gentlemen up here and I share around this on workforce training and development, apprenticeships and internships. I saw in my own hometown, I created a high school internship program for underserved students, girls and boys that wouldn't normally have a chance. We started with 4 high school interns. We ended up 98 before I left there. These were paid internships by the city and businesses with curriculum attached. It's changed their lives. We've got to make sure we include apprenticeships, expanding the trades, tech voc seats that we don't have. We've also got to ensure that we put apprenticeships that are included in the higher ed level as well, connected directly with businesses that are paid. I also believe we've got to scale up existing small businesses and medium-sized businesses, particularly in underserved communities, women and minorities. There's a lot of great companies here that are developing on the Cape that are growing. They need grants, they need microloans, they need technical assistance. This state is not providing that. We can create thousands of jobs if we make that investment to scale up our businesses here in the state of Massachusetts, invest in them so we can include the economy for everyone here in the state of Massachusetts.
So I want to thank the Monomoy High School Democrats for this great forum. This was the most professionally run forum we've been to.
That's true.
And I want to thank all of you for being here, and my colleagues, Bob and Setti, who we've been spending a lot of quality time together, and they're both great people. And if either one of them becomes the Democratic nominee for governor, I will support them 100%, and you should too. But I'm asking for your support. I'm asking for your support. We all have a very ambitious agenda. Lots of areas we need to make progress. I think I'm best positioned to deliver on that ambitious agenda. As the only candidate with leadership experience in state government, when I worked for Governor Patrick, not only oversaw the budget and other stuff, I was often his point person for negotiating a lot of the big things we got through the legislature during that time. I've been there, I've done it, I know how the process works, I've worked successfully through it. I think that should matter. It's not going to matter what we all want to do unless we actually deliver on it. And by the way, we are going to win this election. We are going to win this election. Next time someone says to you, you know what, I'm fine with Charlie Baker, I want you to ask them why. They're not going to tell you he's doing a great job at fixing our transportation system or some other thing. They'll probably say, he seems nice and I'm really glad he isn't crazy. Thank God. Aren't we lucky? But when did the measure of whether our governor's doing a good job become that he's nice and isn't crazy? We face a lot of big challenges. We need to make progress on them. Elections are about choices. And in this case, it's going to be a choice between a governor who's made no difference on any issue that affects people's lives in a real way, has no agenda to do so, and has been terrible about standing up against hate and discrimination, versus someone who desperately wants to do so and who has the leadership experience to deliver on it. I think people are going to choose that. With your help, join our team, and we will make it happen. We will win back the governor's office. We'll aim high again. We'll make Massachusetts a leader, and we will make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Thank you very much.
The next concluding statement will be from Mr. Warren.
Give these high school students another round of applause, please. I looked into the eyes of our young people, and you know something? We need to take heed to what they're saying right now. They made a decision, our young people, that they were not going to embrace what politicians want them to in regard to the status quo on gun violence. They also should inspire us not to embrace what politicians want us to in regard to climate change, or education, or transportation, or housing, or economic opportunity. Folks, this is a moment where we need to stand up and say no to Charlie Baker's law expectations and status quo when it comes to educating our children, when it comes to transportation, when it comes to treating people with opioids. We know we can do better, and we must do better. And this fall, we need big turnout, and we're all going to be working together so that we can reject the politics of the status quo and change the way business is done on Beacon Hill so this state lives up to its full potential. Thank you very much. I ask for your support. I appreciate you being here. Let's win in November.
You're thinking, well, they all believe in the same stuff. How are we ever going to tell them apart? Jay has made the case, Setti's made the case. Jay said that he's been working at the state level. I understand that, I respect that. I've been a lifelong activist for economic, social, racial justice, gender justice. I've worked very hard in my community of Somerville for 35 years. But I also have made change at the national and international level, building organizations that have used capital markets, pension power to roll back what corporations have tried to do. Corporations are attacking our democracy, and we need to defend our democracy. I also believe that we are going to win. And let me tell you why. It's because that big blue wave is coming down on us. And we are going to join together, whoever wins, as a Democratic nominee with Elizabeth Warren and Maura Healey. Elizabeth Warren got 600,000 more votes. And that blue wave has brought us victories in Virginia, in New Jersey, in Missouri, in Wisconsin, in rural Pennsylvania, and in Alabama. And if a Democrat can win in Alabama, a Democrat can win in Massachusetts. I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Questioners, James Kiernan, Izzy O'Donnell, Ted Clifford, and Lily Ryan. Our timers, Veronica Simonson and Tommy Wall. Our sound and lighting technicians, Olivia Hayden and Charvel Masad. Our camera operators, Ryan Meehan, Sean Stone, and Pat McGill. Our candidate handlers. I also want to thank the school administration for supporting this initiative, and to our students and guests in the attendance. Please give a final round of applause to our candidates and wish them good luck in the September election. Thank you. and it'll be available on the WM